Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. Hope you can hear me okay. I'm Jack Chew, and this is Chewing It Over. And I always feel a bit naked until I put my little frame around myself. There we go. Okay, let's hide that for a second. Doesn't really work as much in this room. I've got windows in this one, so I thought I'd escape my office and studio for a little bit. So hope you can all hear me still fine. And you'll notice in that bottom right, it says 12:30 till 1 o'clock, Mondays and Fridays. Here we are on a Thursday. You're going to notice that more. I think we're going to go Mondays, Thursdays, because I think we're going to be able to be more consistent. We've had some bank holidays, including on Fridays, but it's mainly because summer's coming. I've got a camper van. I want to try and get away on Friday afternoons now and again. So, you know, as much as I love chatting to you lot, the beach beckons, and so we're hopefully going to be doing more on Thursdays than on Fridays. So I'll change this frame when we get round to it. Today's show is a very exciting one. I've been hearing on the grapevine for a time now that there's some really interesting stuff rumbling on the world of ACL injury prevention. Heard it from a few little birdies, especially in and around sort of the Salford, the MIP, that sort of stuff that we hear about. And then for Therapy Live, Jim's been chatting to Tom Jacobs and John Room and others about getting them involved. And so we'll talk a little bit about what they've got in store for us at Therapy Live, but let's get stuck into the subject matter, which I always think is fascinating. It's a bit of a holy grail, isn't it, in many ways for injury prevention. We think about if you could tinker around the edges on reducing ankle sprains is all well and good, but these are career-changing and life-changing injuries that affect all ages, really, but especially athletic populations, and can have serious consequences. And so when we think about where we might channel energies, then this is an interesting space. So I'm really excited to get stuck into that with Tom today. And so I will have him introduce himself in a second, hopefully at the click of a couple of buttons. So let's hide my little frame, bring my captions up, and then, Tom, can you hear me?
Hello.
Nice one. Thanks for joining me, mate. You okay?
No worries. Yeah, good, thanks. Good.
Good. Just introduce yourself for the listeners, if you don't mind, and then we'll get stuck into the subject matter, because I hear you're a man who knows a bit about this subject.
Yeah, sure. So I'm an MSK physio. I've been doing MSK stuff for a little while, both in the NHS for some years, and then my current role is a bit of a split. I work in private practice. I do a bit of mentoring for some physios, and my role I'm in, my capacity I'm in today is as a trustee for a charity called SKIP, which is called Sporting Knee Injury Prevention Programs. It's a charity I set up about 4 years ago, and like a multidisciplinary charity with the mission to try to do something about ACL prevention, particularly in the children and adolescent population. So yeah, I'm a MSK physio by heart, really, and I've been working for a number of years in this kind of athletic, well, at least sporting adolescent age group, with working with a couple of schools, and then with the developing player program for WASPs for a while. And so I guess I've come across lots of kids and adolescents with ACL injuries, and, you know, like many physios, I'm sure, and other people listening, that it's something that we see quite a lot once they've injured themselves. So this is a really exciting topic for me, and something that's quite close to my heart with ACL prevention.
So primary prevention has been something that we've always fancied, but always struggled to find either backing or even logical backing on various other things. You know, mainly because a lot of funding into things like, say, broad catalogue terms like low back pain, or that then just traumatic knee injuries were investigated on macro at one point, in which then they were lacking specificity on some of those early papers. What can we define the problem first, then, as to what it is we're trying to prevent in whom in this instance? Like, how common, how prevalent, and how disabling is it for an adolescent or any child of any age? I forget where those things where those categories go with age, but can we just can you give us some facts on that first?
Yeah, I mean, this is to do with ACL ruptures, and I think we all know what that entails, but and a certain amount of ACL injuries are going to happen. We kind of accept that. But I guess new research in the last 10, 20 years or so has brought the problem into sharper focus. The difference between an adult who gets an ACL injury, and I've had an ACL injury myself and had surgery and rehabbed it and stuff. So that is as it is. I mean, and it's not brilliant, but I'm back playing sport and great, you know. But for the children and adolescent population, there's consensus now that the numbers of these injuries happening in that particular population is dramatically on the rise. A study that was done in 2017 showed that there was a 29-fold increase in the last 20 years in the numbers of children and adolescents having these injuries. And not only is there an astronomical increase, which we don't actually quite know why, there's such an increase. There's different schools of thought about that. But what's clear, not just in the UK, that was a UK publication, but in the rest of the world as well, there is a substantial increase in the numbers of children and adolescents who are rupturing their ACL. The second point that makes it even more of a concern is that the situation of once a child or an adolescent has ruptured their ACL is far more complex. It's not just a simple case of saying, you know, should we operate? Should we manage it conservatively, rehab them, you know, and back to sport? It doesn't quite work like that for two reasons. One is that the surgery is much more complex. So if you speak to a surgeon about a kid who's ruptured their ACL, then they're concerned about growth plates, because you're putting a screw through a growth plate, that's going to affect their bone change over time. The other factors are that, you know, for a child, it's not easy for an adult. It wasn't easy for me to rehab from an ACL injury, but for a child, this is their worst nightmare. Getting to a hospital, having to be operated on, even spending a year, 2 years away from their friends and their social group in their formative years. It has an astronomical effect on a developing young person, it would seem. And the other statistical concern with that is that the re-rupture rates are a lot higher in this group. To give you an example, a couple of studies, one done a few years ago, which showed that for an adult, once they've ruptured an ACL and rehabbed it conservatively or operatively, their re-rupture chance or likelihood within 5 years is 1 in 20.
Right.
And that's on either knee, either the contralateral or the one that they've had injured in the first place. For a child or an adolescent, it's 1 in 3. So 1 in 20 for an adult, 1 in 3 for this younger population. And you can kind of understand that because...
Yeah, sorry, if I can, I'll forget to come back to it if I don't pull the brakes on this now. Give me some of the schools of thought as to why we feel that there's such an increase. Like that level of increase is something that has really surprised me. Because I think that a slight increase, you could then try to work out how much of that is by better measurement tools, increased participation in certain things, which might play a part, but it can't do 29 times. Give me the schools of thought if you want, or just give me Tom's take on your favoured theory.
Yeah, I mean, that's the bit. We honestly don't know. I think there's work going on looking into that. And I think I'm hoping that will become clearer as time goes by. I think schools of thought we're getting better at picking it up than we used to. Before, someone would get a swollen knee and they'd say, oh, you know, rub some ice on it and, you know, good luck. Perhaps back in the day more. So we're getting better at picking it up. Our assessments are better. You know, it's good. The clinicians, physios, doctors, etc., are better at recognizing it. The second thing, there's a sort of an increased professionalization of sport. So standards of, for example, grass-based, so the high-risk pivoting sports like football and netball, etc., are becoming, the standard is being pushed up. That filters down to grassroots as well. So, you know, kids used to run around and they might organize a bit of football training. Now they do drills and they talk about speed, and the population is also changing. If you look at some of the secondary school level children people in sort of sixth form age group, there used to be a similar sort of shape and build, and then you'll perhaps have 30% of them are now these enormous tanks who do a lot of strength conditioning. And so I think the professionalization and the pushing up of standards filtering down to this younger age group possibly means intensity goes up and the amount of sport are going up as well. Another school of thought is movement literacy. So less kids out, scraping their knees and climbing up and down hills and trees and stuff like that, perhaps, and they used to do more screen time. So there's this theory about movement literacy, like children losing some of that movement literacy, which I think strength and conditioning and rehab people would find very interesting. Whether that's having an impact. There's even people suggesting things like the pitches are harder these days than they used to be. They're better drainage, there's less waterlogged, there's less give in the surface, more twisting. So, I mean, there's all sorts of ideas, but ultimately.
So and also you can think about more broad health profile stuff with regards to obesity or tissue characteristic factors, sleep deprivation that we know is affecting that demographic. So I'm going to be a swine though, Tom, and say, right, you're not allowed to bottle it. What's your favoured theory, or which do you think are the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle? If you had to choose in the next 5 years as we learn more, where do you think it might go?
There's one school of thought I'm quite behind. I mean, it's an astronomical increase, as you said. So I don't know. I think we're picking it better. There's a lot more girls going into sport these days than they used to, and they are much more likely to have an ACL injury than boys are, statistically speaking. So I think that may play a part in it. Whatever the cause is, I think we can all agree that it's going up around the world, not least in the UK, and that's something that we should be taking notice of, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? Yeah, with the gender disparity there. So I'm definitely going to come back to that. So I cut you off where I think you were going to go, which was to sort of tell a tale as to where things are, our understanding has gone. So if you can give us that sort of both history lesson and then move us towards the now, what has the evidence and as well the sort of practice-based application of that? How has that moved with regards to ACL prevention?
Yeah, so I think the narrative is that for children and adolescents, once they've injured their ACL, we don't have any really good options for them.
Right.
It doesn't matter how good a surgeon you are or how good a rehab expert you are. We don't have great options. I mean, there was another study done this year that showed that even when someone rehabbed really bloody well and they're strong and they hit all the markers that you want them to hit for return to play, they were 10 times more likely than an adult to re-rupture within 2 years. And that's really concerning. So if the solution is not, let's try and help them out once they've injured themselves, then our only option is then to say, we've got to stop these things happening. Yeah, you've got to look upstream. And the thing which got me really excited is that there is a solution to prevention, an evidence-based, practical, cost-effective solution to that, which we don't have a little bit of evidence of, we have a lot of evidence of from around the world. And that sits with something called prevention programs or neuromuscular training programs, or whatever you want to call them, warm-ups, basically. It's how you prepare for a training session or a match, which seems to have dramatic effect in reduction in numbers of ACL injury. So the first time this was looked into was in Santa Monica in like the 70s. There's a chap called Mandelbaum who put together the first version of something called the PEP, which stands for Prevent Injury Enhanced Performance. And the PEP program is the first version of this kind of concept of like warming up in a certain way. And just to give you an idea, it's kind of a mixture of practicing landing, so plyometrics, jumping, doing a little bit of strength, firing up the muscles in a certain way, running in a certain way, and stretching. So you can kind of get, all those things sound like a normal warm-up to me. What's the big deal? Or what's the difference with those things? And you're not wrong. But the difference is they've studied comparing that specific type of sort of firing up warm-up program to a more conventional warm-up program. And they found huge differences between the two. So,
well, because warm-ups are like, it's a really interesting thing where people might go, oh, that sounds familiar. It's like, does it really? I mean, I'm not that old, and it used to be that warm-up would be 2 laps of the pitch, and then you just leathered the ball at the keeper for about 15 minutes, went back in, got cold again as you got your bollocking from your coach, and then you went out, right? It's no way that what you've described represents my childhood in sport. No. And that although things might have improved and certainly changed, again, massive postcode loss true with regards to quality coaching standards, etc. There is, but generally speaking, it's still not familiar. You know, I walk my kids around the park locally and stuff, and I know for a fact that they're not doing sort of the classic drill-based warm-up that you're describing. Is that akin to FIFA 11 Plus? Is that sort of where it ended up going towards? Because I know that that's not just ACL.
No, I mean, but I think ACL prevention formed a big part of where the 11 Plus was formed from. So moving on from that, those early days in the 70s when they started looking into this in America, there was quite a few studies then that popped up in the late 90s, early 2000s around the world, Scandinavia, Switzerland, and the football FMark, who are like the research arm of FIFA. So they looked into this in quite a lot of detail in the early 2000s, and they produced some guidelines for all the national footballing bodies, including the FA, but for all the footballing bodies around the world that play football. And they said, you should be doing these warm-up type programs across all levels of sport, you know, from amateur up to professional. So, and then they released the first version of the 11, the FIFA 11 was the first one, and then the 11 Plus has come out from that. And it's basically a football-specific warm-up program. It's a little bit more in-depth than the original PEP, but it's a football-specific one. So you're doing the same principles. It's landing, it's plyometrics, it's doing some strength exercises, it's doing a bit of stretching and changing direction. And it's got all the same features. In fact, all of the other programs. So there's the PEP, we just described, the 11 Plus, then there's something called Activate, which Keith Stokes put together for the RFU in Bath from research he'd done there, and so that's specific to rugby. A lot of the netball people use the PEP, and I think in New Zealand and Australia they've been using that for a while. So there's a few sport-specific ones, and then there's this PEP, which is a generic one, but they all have similarity. And the interesting thing is they all show effectiveness. So the most powerful, if people want to go and have a look at one good paper, it's one from last year or 2 years ago in the American Journal of Sports Medicine 2020. Huang et al. Did a meta-analysis, and they found that all of these programs were effective, a minimum of 53% reduction in ACL rupture rates. And the highest level I think they found was an 88% reduction in ACL. So the conclusion they drew from this is that a majority of ACL injuries, regardless of age, can be prevented through injury prevention programs. And that's a compelling statistic, isn't it? I mean, if we want to draw on anything, I think that gives us the answer. This is what we should be doing.
Definitely. No, that's fascinating. So when we know that causation is a little more complex than just working backwards like this, but when we notice things like that being responsive to when we think about the pathology and the condition being responsive to treatment like that, you can't help but beg the question when you spot a decent correlation. You can't imply things from it, but it can sometimes say, look over there. That movement literacy piece that you were mentioning before, or the fact that you then are sort of training and priming movement patterning behaviors that might then change forces or train tissue characteristics. You know, we could be biomechanical about it, we could also just broad about conditioning principles, but it does a little bit, doesn't it, to go back to the reasons, the cause for the vulnerability. Do you feel that does fuel that interest, or am I making a bit of a leap that some of the sort of statisticians are allergic to?
Yeah, I mean, with my science head on, I think there's lots that we don't know. The one thing we can say categorically is that they work. I guess the thinking is that there's something to do with practicing movements and getting muscle recruitment. I mean, you've probably seen this hundreds of times. So when someone like gets patellofemoral pain, for example, and they do a squat and think, oh, I got pain, and then you get them to do loads of like inner range quads, or you get them to do loads of straight leg raises or something like that, and you get them to redo. Sometimes they'll have no pain again. You think, oh, that's odd. So you're firing up muscles, maybe. There's this thinking about neuromuscular recruitment that. I mean, there's some people have started to refer to the power up program rather than a warm up program. It's sort of like you're powering up centers in the body.
The kids are quite like that, actually, I think.
Well, they do. I mean, Sky are going to run a documentary on this later in the year, which will be quite exciting. But when we went and saw some of these kids, the coach who'd really, for this particular football team, who'd really got on board with it, because his own kid had an ACL injury, quite a traumatic experience, interestingly. He'd started calling it the Power Up program, because trying to give it more like a positive spin, and they've really bought into it. So that was quite interesting. But I think that kind of gives you an idea of what it's doing physiologically. It's trying to get muscles engaged, and it's trying to get the brain and the proprioceptive movements perhaps a bit more cognitive, perhaps a bit more. I think when you think about the ACL and what it does, it seems to be there's some sort of pivoting, sometimes hyperextension, but a lot of the times it's pivoting, over pivoting that's going on. And there can be lots of factors associated with that, both like when they happen spontaneously or when someone comes in and gives you a good old nudge, which happened to me. But I think there's something around neuromuscular firing and thinking about the proprioceptive positioning of what you're doing. And for some reason, the automatic centers, I think, get switched. I have no evidence for that, but I think that's probably
sure. No, but that's why I was baiting you into that, just trying to us speculating as we try to learn. For some reason, I think it must be a sort of a permissions thing that it's telling me. It's not telling me who this is that's put the comment on LinkedIn. But Juicy Talk, about to give my PhD on this. Check out Prep to Play. Now, whoever that is, you need to let us know, because then I can follow up and get you on the show to talk about your PhD as it develops. But that's really interesting to hear. We had a question come in from Luke Todd. Tom, why do girls rupture ACL more commonly? He's giving you an easy one there, hasn't he? Not?
Don't know. It's the short answer. I mean, interestingly, if you speak to peds physios, people like Tom Quantrell, they'll tell you a little bit about femoral alignment or femoral anteversion during puberty, early puberty. That changes quite a lot. Maybe that's a factor. And then that actually then re-rotates or derotates later in adolescence. Possibly there's a feature there. Don't know is the honest answer. But netball is a concerning sport because there's a heck of a lot of ACL injuries that happen in netball.
It's just that they pivot. They train pivot. It's like compared to other things, it's just that torsion is always happening. Pelvic morphology is one of the more significant sex-based differences, isn't it, with regards to boys and girls, especially in puberty as that changes. And so, I know there's a lot there. There's also obviously the sociological differences that we mentioned before with regards to participation that's really quite hard to uncouple. It's the sort of things that you therefore, one of the things we could get caught out with in lay clinics is then really struggling to know what the signal's telling us, and that it takes for the researchers to also help us tease that out as to whether or not it correlates with the participation rates increasing in certain sports and also intensities, or is it that there's also something else there that is relevant to the signal. Difference sometimes we don't want to over assume, but I know it's a messy one, and certainly something that interestingly we're really wanting to. We have a stream at Therapy Live called The Female Patient. I think maybe you and colleagues could potentially contribute perhaps within that as well, especially you mentioned a medic that's going to be joining you maybe. We really do want to visit that as part of that stream, because it's not a women's health pelvic health stream. It's about what are some of the unique features that have been overlooked.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that when we look at categorical statistics, things that show a statistical link with ACL rupture. There's only a few. One is female gender. Sport is football for female in sport. Early introduction to sport seems to be a factor as well. So if they start with sport earlier, interestingly,
Right.
they're at higher risk
Right.
over the course of time. And intensity and duration of activity as well seems to be another link. But outside of that, we don't have hard evidence as yet. And it's a very interesting topic. I mean, there's a familial link, another one as well. So people in families, my brother's ruptured his ACL. So there is a strong familial link from the research, and contralateral injury, unfortunately. I think if you've ruptured one, you're more likely to rupture the other. But I think going back to your point about what we did as kids, running around the pitch, take a few shots, there's your warm up, crack on. I mean, I remember doing a lot of this and a lot of this, So, but then our parents' generation did nothing. You just run out of the pitch, get going. So there was obviously a change in thinking let's do something at least. So
yeah, that's a good point.
I find that a little bit of a comfort that, okay, so there was a step change and now we just need to change again. If prevention's our only option for this group of people, then we need to confront there are barriers. Kids and coaches are like, oh, really? Do you have to warm up? Okay. So there are barriers to this. We can't close our eyes and ignore that fact. We have to deal with the real world. But I think that coaches are going to be absolutely key in this succeeding in the future, and hopefully ending up with there being proper change from the FA and grassroots coaching courses, teaching them this. They don't have any of that in their literature, as far as I know at the moment, and getting it in curriculums into schools so that we can really get some nationwide change. And we were doing a lot in Oxfordshire with Skip, with our group, and Therapy Live will be an interesting time to be able to start to push it out to the rest of the country. And we're looking to get some ambassadors and volunteers and in local areas. John Rim will come on to that a bit more, I'm hoping, with you at a later date.
No, that sounds brilliant, and thank you for all you're doing there. I think one of the things that's useful as well with regards to getting MSK therapists on board that can then help to put that pressure on in their localities, so that then and also we know the therapists are also parents that could also then have influence, that then, especially if they're known to the school as a physio, then they often know their PE teachers. And that's sometimes that trickle effect that we do want to start to really get. You get that top down and bottom up. It can be a real sweet spot of provoking positive social change. So I really appreciate what you're doing, and the fact that you're going to be disseminating that for us and with us is amazing. Of course, if Skip or any of the other causes that you're involved on want to have any sort of space or stand or want to do anything at Therapy Live, especially our in-person locations, then obviously more than happy to give them opportunities to talk to who needs to, because this is important for us to get that out there. What are we in this game for if it's not to do it? And when we have those glimpses of positive evidence pointing towards prevention, we need to grab them, because sometimes we are too reactive, and especially with the sort of delays to recognition and stuff, we just need to be better. So it's really quite exciting and optimistic news. You've mentioned that it's an exciting couple of years in this field, really, with regards to what is likely to be out there. So I imagine that's something you're going to touch on at Therapy Live as well.
Yeah, I think in the UK we need to raise our game. We're behind other countries right now. There's Scandinavia, right, Canada, Switzerland. There's lots of other countries doing lots more, and I'm really hoping this will be a big change for us in the UK, that we can raise our game. So the next year, 2 years, I think could be really important. So I believe physios and other MSK-based practitioners are going to be real important ambassadors for this, and I'm excited to talk about it a little bit more at Therapy Live.
Brilliant. Well, honestly, I'm excited for us to be able to get our shoulder behind your wheel as well, and make sure we can do all we can to amplify voices such as yours and John's and colleagues that are doing such great work. So excited to see it all unfold. Do make sure you let folk know where they can follow, say, you or any of your work on social media.
Thanks very much for that. So skipcharity.org.uk is the website. That's got all the materials on it, videos and stuff. You can find more info there. And thanks also for your support, Jack, and your team. So it's much appreciated.
No problem, mate. That's absolutely fine. And I look forward to seeing you then on the 25th of June. All the best. Cheers, everyone.